Imagine stepping into like a grand ancient cathedral. Everything around you is designed to make you feel really small, but also incredibly safe.
Right. There's a master architect, a divine plan.
Exactly. There's a strict set of rules. You know exactly where you stand in the universe.
It's this comforting hierarchy where everything has a purpose and, someone is in charge.
But then someone walks through those heavy wooden doors, looks up at the vaulted ceiling, and basically says, there is no architect. This building didn't choose to be here.
Yeah, and those holy texts you're reading, they're just paper and ink.
Just paper and ink written and edited by regular guys over hundreds of years.
Which is the absolute definition of shattering a worldview.
Completely. And the man who actually said this out loud in the 1600s was hit with the most brutal cancellation in history. His name was Baruch Spinoza.
A total philosophical bomb.
Right. So today we are diving into a comprehensive entry in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy to figure out why his highly controversial, supposedly dangerous ideas are exactly what you might need to make sense of the world today.
And just to be clear, we aren't here to endorse these scandalous views or, take any sides.
No, not at all. Our mission for you today is simply to explore the radical philosophy that shook the foundations of the 17th century.
And to really grasp the weight of his ideas, you have to look at the physical reality of his life. You just cannot separate his philosophy from the devastating real-world consequences of his abominable heresies.
Yeah, let's set the scene here. We are in 17th century Amsterdam. Spinoza is a star pupil in the city's Portuguese Jewish community.
Right, he's intellectually gifted, he's sitting in the synagogue just absorbing everything.
Possibly even being groomed to be a rabbi. But then, on July 27, 1656, at the age of 24, his entire universe collapses.
It really does.
He is hit with a herem, which is an excommunication or ban. And this wasn't just like a slap on the wrist.
No, it was the harshest ban ever issued by that community,
Right.
and it was never rescinded.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the document itself is chilling to read. The community leaders cited his monstrous deeds and abominable heresies.
Yeah, they cursed him by day and by night, when he lies down and when he rises up.
They literally said no one was allowed to communicate with him, do business with him, or even stand within 4 cubits of him.
It is the ultimate social isolation.
Wait, hold on. He was 24. What exactly was this young guy saying out loud that warranted the absolute harshest ban in history?
Well, the source suggests he was giving voice to an unholy trinity of youthful claims.
Okay.
First, he denied the immortality of the soul. He basically said, when you die, you die.
Wow. Okay, so that's strike one.
Right. Second, he strongly rejected the notion of a transcendent providential God, meaning there is no judging God of Abraham looking down from the clouds making decisions.
No divine referee.
Exactly.
Right.
And third, he claimed that religious law, the commandments of the Torah, were neither literally given by God nor any longer binding on anyone.
So he essentially walked into the center of his community and just detonated everything they stood for.
Completely. And you have to look at why this was so uniquely threatening to the leaders of that era.
Right, because it wasn't just a religious threat, it was political.
Yes. Organized religions, and frankly the entire political structure of the 17th century, relied really heavily on the framework of an immortal soul and a judging God. That's how they maintained order and authority.
Because if you remove the fear of eternal punishment in hell or, the hope of eternal reward in heaven, you just pull the rug out from under the social contract.
Exactly. Why would the peasants obey the king or the clergy if there is no cosmic scorekeeper?
But the wild part is that Spinoza didn't beg for forgiveness. According to the text, he actually seemed relieved.
Yeah, he just accepted it.
He used the total isolation to his advantage. He leaves organized religion completely behind, moves to a quiet place, and takes up lens grinding to make a living.
Which is such a brilliant historical parallel.
It really is. He is literally grinding lenses for telescopes and microscopes during the day, like helping people see the physical world more clearly.
And then secretly writing down these explosive philosophical ideas at night.
Exactly. And those late-night writings culminated in his masterwork, The Ethics.
Right.
So let's get into the ethics, because if you get kicked out of your community for saying God isn't a bearded guy in the sky judging you, you have to replace that idea with something else.
And he replaces it with the famous Latin phrase, Deus, sive Natura, God or nature.
God or nature.
Right. Spinoza claimed there is only one substance in the entire universe, and that single infinite substance is God.
So wait, everything else?
Everything else, the rocks, the birds, human bodies, human minds, they are just what he calls modes, temporary expressions of God.
So is Spinoza basically saying that humans, mountains, and rivers are all just tiny temporary apps running on the infinite operating system of God?
I love that analogy.
Yes.
Or think of it like an infinite ocean. The ocean is the one true substance, the eternal God. And humans, mountains, and trees are just the temporary waves that rise and fall on the surface.
So they look distinct for a fleeting moment, but they are always just the ocean.
That is the perfect way to visualize it. And the ocean itself doesn't have a personality.
Right. It's not thinking about us.
Exactly. It doesn't decide to make a waves to punish a sailor or, make a calm sea to reward a faithful captain.
Because there's no intent.
Right. There's just the underlying reality, the infinite eternal laws of nature, which he calls naturum, naturans, or naturing nature.
Naturing nature. Got it.
And then there are the temporary expressions of those laws, the waves, which he calls naturata, or natured nature.
So it is one deeply unified system governed by absolute mathematical necessity.
Yes. And the source emphasizes that this completely dismantles teleology.
Teleology being the idea that the universe has a purpose or a goal.
Right. God isn't making choices. The ocean isn't planning anything. Spinoza viewed the idea of a God with plans as deeply arrogant.
Because it implies God wants something he doesn't have.
Exactly. It implies that God lacks something and is trying to achieve a goal. In Spinoza's view, everything follows necessarily from the laws of nature, exactly the way the properties of a triangle follow from the very definition of a triangle.
There's no other way for a triangle to be.
Right. And because of this, Spinoza argues that miracles are flat out impossible.
Well, yeah, because a miracle would mean God acting against the laws of nature, which, in his philosophy, would mean God acting against himself.
Which is logically absurd.
Uh-huh.
He claims that what people call miracles are just events where human beings are completely ignorant of the natural causes.
That makes sense.
There is a brutal critique in the text where Spinoza talks about a stone falling from a roof and hitting someone on the head.
Okay, what does he say about that?
People will say, oh, it's God's will to punish him. And if you ask why the wind blew the stone, they will say God willed the wind.
And if you ask why the person was walking there?
They'll say God willed the person to walk there. Spinoza says people will just keep asking why, until they finally run out of answers and take refuge in the will of God.
Wow.
Which Spinoza hilariously and devastatingly calls the sanctuary of ignorance.
This sanctuary of ignorance, that is amazing. But wait, I have to push back here. If everything is just the ocean crashing mathematically and there are no alternate possibilities, doesn't that make human choices completely meaningless?
It's a common reaction.
I mean, why should anyone listening to this even get out of bed in the morning if the script is entirely pre-written by the laws of physics?
What's fascinating here is how Spinoza anticipated that exact despair. He actually believed that understanding this unbroken, deterministic chain of cause and effect is the key to human freedom.
Wait, how is determinism the key to freedom? That sounds like a paradox.
Follow his logic here. He argues that believing in a judging God who hands out rewards and punishments enslaves people to two deeply destabilizing emotions: hope and fear.
Oh, interesting. So imagine you are listening to this right now, and you are facing a massive crisis. Maybe you lost your job. You are trapped, swinging like a pendulum between hoping you will miraculously get it back and fearing you will lose everything.
Yes, and that is exactly the vulnerability that opportunistic preachers and politicians exploit.
Because you're desperate.
Right. They use your hope for salvation or your fear of ruin to control your behavior. Spinoza is essentially offering a 17th century Stoic cheat code for modern anxiety.
Okay, I like that. A cheat code for anxiety.
He argues that if you use your reason to understand that everything happens out of absolute natural necessity, that a loss or a tragedy couldn't have happened any other way, just like a triangle must have three sides, you stop fighting reality.
You stop being tossed around by the emotional waves of hope and fear.
Exactly. You stop taking the universe personally.
And you achieve a profound peace of mind.
Yes. For Spinoza, true freedom isn't about making spontaneous, uncaused choices. True freedom is about acting autonomously from a place of rational understanding, rather than just reacting blindly to external events.
Okay, so if God is just this infinite, uncaring ocean, and there are no miracles or divine plans, that leaves a massive, dangerous question hanging in the air.
About that.
What exactly is the Bible? If God didn't magically dictate it from the clouds, who wrote it?
Ah, yes. And this specific logical leap leads us to Spinoza's most explosive public work. He published the Theological-Political Treatise anonymously in 1670.
Because he knew it was going to cause trouble.
And the religious and political establishment absolutely lost their minds anyway? This is the text that one overwrought critic famously called a book forged in hell by the devil himself.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because Spinoza essentially operates as the world's first modern fact-checker in this book.
He really does.
He argues that Moses didn't write the majority of the Torah.
And he doesn't just make the claim, he proves it using the text itself.
Right, he points out that the text frequently refers to Moses in the third person.
Exactly. And it explicitly details the death and burial of Moses. How could Moses write about his own burial?
And it uses place names, like the city of Dan, that historical records prove didn't even exist during Moses' lifetime. He's looking at the anachronisms.
Yes, he's treating the Bible exactly like a Wikipedia page, with multiple editors, historical corruptions, and missing citations.
He suggests it was compiled generations later, likely by Ezra the scribe.
Right, and this is a completely radical hermeneutics, a brand new way of interpreting sacred text. Spinoza insists we must study the Bible exactly as we study nature.
By gathering empirical data from the text itself.
Exactly. You examine the history of the Hebrew language, the political context of the authors, the shifting pronouns. He even goes after the prophets.
He says they weren't philosophers with VIP access to the absolute truth of the universe.
No, they were just pious people with very vivid imaginations writing for a specific audience in a specific time.
And he warns against turning religion into superstition by worshiping paper and ink. But the fascinating thing is, he doesn't throw the Bible in the trash.
He doesn't.
He says that if you apply this historical method, if you strip away the supernatural miracles and the ancient politics, the true universal message of Scripture is actually incredibly simple.
Right. It's just love your neighbor,
Yeah.
justice and charity. That is the entire core of true religion. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the brilliance of Spinoza's move here is deeply political.
How so?
Think about the implications. By naturalizing the Bible and reducing its core message simply to moral conduct, Spinoza completely strips religious authorities of their power to dictate science, philosophy, or truth.
Oh, wow.
He is looking right at the clergy and saying, your domain is teaching people to be kind to each other. That is it. You have zero authority to tell a scientist how the universe works or to tell a philosopher what to think.
He builds an absolute firewall between faith and reason. Faith is about obedience and charity, and reason is about discovering truth. They don't overlap at all. But wait, if the clergy are stripped of their power, and true religion is just love your neighbor who actually runs society, how do we govern a bunch of self-interested humans?
Well, this brings us to his political philosophy. Spinoza was heavily influenced by Thomas Hobbes.
Right, Hobbes described the pre-political state of nature as a terrifying place where everyone acts purely out of violent self-interest.
Yes, and Spinoza agrees that humans are driven by self-interest and passions. To survive, we form a social contract and create a state.
But unlike Hobbes, who thought we needed an absolute monarch to keep us in line, Spinoza fiercely advocates for democracy.
He does, but there's a catch.
Yeah, so what does this all mean? Because the source notes something really surprising about his ideal democracy. He argues the state should have total control over outward religious practices.
Right, the ceremonies, the public rites, the holidays.
He wants the government to control all of that to prevent sectarian disputes from tearing society apart.
He views public religious practice as a matter of state business. It is essentially crowd control.
Hold on. You are saying the guy who wrote the book, Forged in Hell, The Ultimate Heretic, wants the government to completely control religion.
I know,
That sounds like a glaring contradiction. How can Spinoza argue that the state should control religion, but in the same breath be this passionate defender of ultimate personal freedom and free speech?
This raises an important question, and it's all about how he separates things. He meticulously separates the outward actions of the body from the inward actions of the mind.
Okay, so the outward ceremonies are just social theater to keep the peace.
Exactly. But the inward worship of God, your private thoughts, your beliefs, and your speech, that is an inalienable private right. He argues that no sovereign can ever actually control what people think.
Because if the government tries to force everyone to speak only what the state prescribes, people will just say one thing in public and believe another in private.
Right. Trying to crush free speech is unnatural. It breeds deep resentment. It turns citizens into enemies of the state, and ultimately it leads to the ruin of the state.
So he favors democracy because it is the most natural way to align rational self-interest with public safety.
Yes, in a democracy, the people only obey laws that issue from the general will, which preserves that natural equality we had before the state existed.
So to him, a strong democratic state isn't there to brainwash you or control your mind. It is there to protect you from the physical chaos of other people's volatile passions so that your mind is totally free to explore the truth.
It is a profoundly modern view of the liberal state, written centuries before the Enlightenment really took hold. The freedom to philosophize doesn't threaten public peace. It is the very thing that guarantees it.
So bringing this all together for you listening right now, why does a lens grinder from the 1600s matter to your life today?
It's a great question.
We live in a modern world plagued by massive information overload, constant sectarian anger, and endless appeals to authority on social media and the news. And Spinoza essentially offers a roadmap for the modern learner.
He really does.
He tells us to ruthlessly strip away superstitions. Don't just accept a claim because it is written in an old book or spoken by a very loud, powerful person.
Look for the underlying natural causes of things.
Right. Moderate your exhausting passions, your wild hopes and your crippling fears through rational understanding. And above all, treat others with justice and benevolence.
It is a philosophy that demands a staggering amount of intellectual independence. You have to be willing to look at the universe without the comforting illusions, but it rewards that courage with deep tranquility.
Before we wrap up, I want to unpack one final mind-bending idea rooted in the very end of Spinoza's Ethics. It is a concept that completely redefines what it means to learn something.
Oh, the three kinds of knowledge.
Right. Spinoza believed human beings process information in three distinct stages.
So the first kind is basically imagination and hearsay. It is the fragmented, confused way we experience the world every day.
Like the sun looks small, so we assume it is small.
Exactly. It's knowledge based on random experience.
Then there is the second kind of knowledge, which is reason. This is scientific understanding. You learn the mathematical laws of optics and astronomy, and you understand why the sun only looks small, even though it is massive.
You start seeing the chain of cause and effect.
But the ultimate goal is the third kind of knowledge.
Yes. This is a profound, intuitive understanding of the entire system. It's when you grasp how a single, specific thing is necessarily connected to the infinite essence of God or nature.
Spinoza says that when you achieve this third kind of knowledge, when you truly understand the necessary, unchangeable reality of something, you are seeing the universe sub specie eternitatis.
Which means seeing things under the aspect of eternity.
You are no longer viewing reality from the limited, biased perspective of a human being trapped in a specific time and place.
You are briefly looking at the universe from the perspective of the infinite ocean itself.
Yes. You are literally stepping outside of time, because your mind is briefly mirroring the eternal intellect of nature.
It's incredible.
So the next time you are grinding away at a difficult problem or reading a dense book, and you get that deep aha moment where a complex truth finally clicks into place, ask yourself, are you just learning a new fact? Or are you actually experiencing a fleeting moment of true immortality?
It is a beautiful, deeply empowering way to think about the pursuit of knowledge. The act of understanding the universe actually connects you to the eternal.
It really is. It turns out you don't need a grand cathedral, a divine architect, or an unquestionable ancient text to find your place in the universe. You just need the courage to look at the infinite ocean and understand how it actually works. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.